Hello, hello. Thanks for being here. I'm excited to talk about today's topic because it's something that yes, 100% of my clients, and actually most people in the world, struggle with. And that's the desire for control. Lots of times we desire to control things that we actually don't have the power to control. Things like other people's thoughts, other people's feelings or actions, or circumstances or events in the world that have already taken place, for example. And I think it's important to just spend some time real quick recognizing that these are uncontrollable things. So I think it's worth it to say it again. We cannot control other people's thoughts, and contrary to popular belief, we actually can't control other people's feelings either. If we say hateful things to someone, that might trigger an insecurity of theirs, so they would then think a negative thought about themselves. But ultimately, we have no control over what happens in other people's brains. They might hear your hateful thought and just have no ounce of belief in it, so they wouldn't think twice about it. It's up to them. That said, spreading hate will actually just make you feel like crap, and I don't condone doing that because I believe uplifting others feels so much better and is much more aligned with our highest self. Anyway, we also can't control other people's actions, nor can we control circumstances or events, things that have already happened, or even current or future circumstances if they are outside the realm of our thoughts, feelings, or actions, which are the only things we can control: our thoughts, our feelings, and our actions. To some of us, these might not seem like a lot of things. We want more control, dang it. And to others of us, we struggle being able to control those things we actually, quote, have control over. And that's okay. All thoughts and feelings around control are welcome here. Instead of judging yourself or fighting or resisting what I'm saying, I invite you to keep your thoughts if you like them, but hold them loosely enough so that you can enter into this conversation from an open, curious standpoint. Because if you're able to do that, you might see or understand something that could have a pretty notable impression on your life. For the better, I should clarify. Okay, now that I have your open mind, let's first discuss why we like control. Here's what it boils down to. We want to control our internal environment, which is made up of our thoughts and feelings, and our external environment, which is made up of our actions, other people's thoughts, feelings, and actions, and life situations and circumstances, all because we don't want to experience negative emotions. We will try so hard to tighten the grip of control to avoid negative emotions for ourselves, meaning we want our internal environment to feel good, and we also want other people's internal environments to feel good, which are actually our external environments. Basically, we just want everyone to be happy. Unless we are suffering, and then we want other people to suffer too, typically, but that's a different conversation for a different day. Typically, we want everyone to be happy. And do you know why we want us and everyone else to be happy? Because it feels good. And often we falsely put ourselves in charge of other people's happiness because we can't be happy if they're not happy, which of course puts a lot of pressure on them to be happy, which then puts pressure on us to make them happy, which we actually can't do. So we can just be happy. It's exhausting. Physiologically, our bodies thrive when we're happy. The stress hormone cortisol lowers while our happy neurotransmitters, also known as dopamine and serotonin, get released, which feels awesome. And happiness impacts so many areas of our life, including our ability to sleep. It can affect our immune system, and basically it's just rad, okay? I don't need to explain to you all why happiness is awesome, but it's good to know that our bodies love it too, and it's kind of this primal drive to be happy because of all of these awesome rewards we get from both our bodies and our brains. So the idea is that if we can just control our internal and external environments just enough, we'll be able to feel better. If we can just plan and coordinate and decide and work hard enough, my God, maybe we can do it so well that we can avoid negative emotions altogether. All we have to do is have complete control. Sounds simple, right? Yeah, it doesn't sound simple because it's not. But subconsciously, we're actually trying to do this. We think we should, there's that red flag word again, we think we should be able to control or manage this situation or her feelings or his actions. I mean, if we tell this person to do something and they don't do it, we make it mean either they, one, don't respect or care about us, which doesn't feel good, or two, we make it mean the way we asked wasn't motivating or intimidating enough to instill change. So we weren't as controlling as we should have been. Dang it. So we need to demand more respect from them, or get them to care more about us, or ask in a way that's more influential. See how all of those options... Lola, hey, stop please. See how all of those options feel pressury? We're piling more of this illusion of control onto our shoulders. We think we have way more power than we actually do. And instead of seeing that as disempowering, it actually frees us up and alleviates so much of the pressure we put on ourselves, the pressure to control things we can't control, and helps us regain control over the things we actually have the power to control ourselves. Lola, please stop, baby. Can you done? Thank you. This shows up a lot when we parent our kids. And our kids don't behave in the way we want them to behave. That's typically when we double down on the control. And it's all because we want to feel better. You might say, no, I'm doubling down on control because I care about my kids' safety and well-being. They're not making smart decisions. I totally understand that desire. Of course, I have it too for my son. And I'm absolutely a fan of setting up boundaries and consequences. For example, if you sneak out of the house in the middle of the night, you will have a right or a privilege taken away. Or for younger kids, if you hit your brother, you will be taken out of his reach into a different room to keep your brother safe. Boundaries and consequences are effective tools to take care of your children's safety and well-being. But here's the thing. You can't actually control them. You cannot go into their brains and orchestrate the neural pathways to connect in such a way that it would cause them to act in a certain way. We can scare them and push them really hard to get them to do what we want, which I do not recommend, but that's another conversation. But we can't actually control them. At the end of the day, they have autonomy over what types of actions their bodies take. But we often live our lives believing we can or should be able to control others, or at least to some degree. And so we spend a lot of energy and focus and pressure on trying to control and manage our environments. And ultimately, it's so we can prevent feeling those negative emotions. The negative emotions that come when your teenager sneaks out in the middle of the night. You might feel anger by thinking thoughts like, my kid doesn't respect me. You might feel fear by thinking thoughts or thinking of all the things that could go wrong when they sneak out. You might feel shame by thinking thoughts like, I must be a bad parent for raising a kid that disobeys me. Or when your toddler hits his brother. Or when your toddler hits her brother. You might feel embarrassment because you're thinking thoughts like, other kids don't hit like her, I must be doing something wrong. You might feel worry by thinking thoughts like, poor little Timmy is going to be afraid of his sister. Or maybe you'd feel anger or stress by thinking, now I have to deal with this situation instead of getting the stuff done I need to get done. So we put all our best plans in place and kind of white knuckle our patience when things don't go according to plan. There's nothing wrong with making plans, of course. I love a good plan. But when we have so much riding on the success of our plans, we have our feelings, we have other people's feelings, we have our actions, other people's actions, outside situations where we have 0% control. When there's so much riding on our plans and when our plans don't go as, planned, that's typically when we lose it. That's when the negative emotion floodgates open because until now, we've been, quote, managing our emotions by ignoring them or fighting them, relying on our perfect plan to keep them at bay, so we're not actually processing them. By this time, we've built up quite an accumulation of painful feelings, and fighting them is taking more energy, combined with the energy and pressure of having this illusion of control, and of course the dam breaks and we lose it. When we lose it, when we experience a heightened negative emotion, we move out of the window of tolerance, where we're able to regulate less stimulating emotions on a smaller scale, and we move into hyper or hypoarousal states. I mentioned the window of tolerance in my podcast a couple of weeks ago, but I love repeating information because I have to hear something apparently a million times before it sinks into my stubborn brain. So let's review it again. The window of tolerance is a term used to used to describe the zone of emotional arousal in which a person is able to function most effectively. When people are within this zone, when they are in their window of tolerance, they're able to readily receive, process, and integrate information and respond to the demands of everyday life without much difficulty. Their brain can effectively process stimuli, making them better able to reflect, think rationally, and make decisions calmly without feeling either overwhelmed or withdrawn. When people go outside of their window of tolerance, usually during times of extreme stress, i.e., when we lose it, people will experience periods of either hyper or hypoarousal. So, hyperarousal is otherwise known as our fight or flight response, and it's characterized by hypervigilance, feelings of anxiety, panic, and racing thoughts. Hypoarousal, otherwise known as our freeze response, can cause feelings of emotional numbness, emptiness, or paralysis. In either of these states, we become unable to process stimuli effectively. The prefrontal cortex region of our brain, our upper brain, shuts down, affecting the ability to think rationally, causing our feelings to become dysregulated, which may take the form of chaotic responses or overly rigid responses. For bingers, this is most often when we binge, when we're outside of the window of tolerance. Speaking of binge eating, let's see how this illusion of control typically plays out for us binge eaters as it relates to dieting and the body image. The storylines can vary, but overall, it goes like this. I call it diet culture, a shitty story of lies and false illusions of control. First, we are lied to by the dominant culture from a young age that thinness is equal to attractiveness, and attractiveness equals value as a human, specifically a female human for the most part. So we fully believe that we, as women, have to be thin to be good enough or as valuable as other thin people. Simultaneously, we're lied to by diet culture that we have 100% control over the size and shape of our body. Just eat very little and exercise a lot, and you will have full human value. Oh, still not thin? You must be too weak to follow the rules. That's embarrassing. Here, buy some of the stuff to make it easier. OMG, that didn't work either? Yikes, girl. I don't know what to tell you. It's so easy for me and my naturally thin set point weight. Are you following the rules 100% of the time, like I am definitely not doing? It must be that. Just do it perfectly. Eat even less. Move even more. Track everything. Control everything. Don't slip up ever, because then you've done all this work for nothing. So, we become obsessed with food, specifically the no foods that we were told not to eat, and wonder, especially the bad foods that we were told not to eat, and wonder why we can't control ourselves around them. We think if we could just control our appetites, maybe I'll distract myself with something so my primal bodily urges will stop demanding food. Or maybe I'll just try these filling low-calorie foods. Maybe I'll just fast 3 days a week. Maybe I'll skip breakfast. Maybe I'll sleep all day so I don't even think about food. The list of quote strategies goes on and on. And it doesn't work. The research shows that 95% of diets don't work in the long run because they're not sustainable. And it's not because we lack self-control. First, our bodies work really hard to maintain homeostasis. So when we don't feed it enough, our metabolism might slow, our hunger and fullness hormones adjust, and our bodies do this to uphold our natural weight, our body's set point. But second, diets don't work not because we lack self-control, but because we are exhibiting too much control. Hear me out. When we think we should be able to control something, but we're just not strong enough to do it, that's very frustrating because of how much we like control and how much we just want to feel good. So we try even harder and put more pressure on ourselves to control. But the more pressure and control we put on ourselves, the more easily we are triggered to move out of the window of tolerance. We're not actually regulating ourselves. We're just expending all of our energy trying to control everything around us so we don't have to feel negative emotions. And when we're in this hyper or hypoarousal states, we can't self-regulate. We can't control our responses or reactions. For a lot of us that listen to this podcast, this is when we binge. It's too much for our nervous systems to bear. Our inner protector is there to put out the fire when all else fails. And binging is our protector's way to protect us, to do that. If you don't struggle with binge eating, your inner protector might have another way to put out the fire. So instead of learning self-regulation strategies, healthy coping mechanisms, repair strategies like self-compassion and curiosity, or instead of processing our emotions while we're in the window of tolerance, we just try to control our environments, both external and internal, so much that we can avoid negative emotions altogether. But that is an exhausting and impossible strategy, and it's often that pressure of controlling it all, that rigidity, can trigger us to leave the window of tolerance. Remember, when we're in the window of tolerance, we're not perfectly happy all the time. It's not pure bliss. It's just a regulated state. It's integrated, meaning we can kind of ebb and flow with the ups and downs of life, riding with our emotions instead of fighting them. We think having more control over ourselves, over others, and over situations gives us more power. But actually, it's that need for control that gets all the power. That need comes from a deficit, meaning we don't know how to cope without having control, which is not powerful at all and actually takes our power from us. The real power comes from trusting ourselves to take care of ourselves, to get our needs met, to adapt, to offer compassion, to open up to curiosity, and regulate our nervous systems while we're in the window of tolerance. When we do that, we're expanding our window of tolerance, meaning we're increasing our emotional resiliency, meaning we won't lose it and react uncontrollably as easily. And even when we do move outside the window of tolerance, we can tap into the integrated part of us that we know so well to process the emotion that's there and move back into the window of tolerance when we're ready. This is better than control. It's integration. Integration is when we can adapt and be flexible, when we can problem solve and be resourceful. It takes the pressure off of having to have everything planned out perfectly so we won't upset our lives. Instead, integration allows us to take back our power by knowing when our plans don't go perfectly, we can stay with ourselves. We can know we're safe and trust that we will figure out the next right thing. You know, I love an analogy. So here's kind of one that really helps me with this concept. If control says, I will fight to control the wind so I can trust the ocean will be still. Whereas integration says, I will learn to ride the waves and trust the ocean will be the ocean. When we have an overwhelming desire to control, what we're saying is, I need my internal and external environments to be okay so that I'm okay. When we develop integration, we're saying, I trust in my ability to be okay, even when my internal and external environments are not okay. The real power is in loosening the tight grip of control. The perfect example of this is the practice of intuitive eating. Intuitive eating forfeits the control we have from our brains and instead places it onto our bodies. We're not going to count the calories anymore. We're not going to keep the food rules. We're not going to buy the diet products and subscribe to the rigid protocols of diet culture anymore. We're letting go of that tight grip. We're trusting in our bodies to figure it out imperfectly. We're trusting our bodies to know what's right. And when we get it wrong, or when our bodies get it wrong, I should say, and we don't feel, and when we get in our heads and get it wrong, or when our bodies get it wrong sometimes and we maybe don't feel as well as we'd like after we ate something, if we fall off the surfboard, we offer compassion. We get curious about what happened. We take a break if we need to, and we lovingly get back on the surfboard and keep learning to ride the waves, because that's what real power looks like. So here it is, friends, another invitation. An invitation to stop fighting the wind so you can keep the ocean still. The ocean isn't meant to be still, and you aren't meant to control the wind. You don't have to carry that pressure. All it's doing is depleting you. If you're ready to learn to ride the waves, to learn how to process negative emotion and be with imperfection, I would love to show you how powerful you can really be. Schedule a free 30-minute consultation call with me to see if my 12-week End Secret Binging program is right for you. Visit sammybcoaching.com. That's SAMMYBEE coaching.com to take that first step. See you next week, friends.